generally dry and fine with bright or sunny spells. There may be the odd shower for eastern coasts. This afternoon across Wales it will be dry with sunny spells. The lengthiest sunny spells will be in the north, with more in the way of cloud across the south of the country. The Midlands will remain widely dry throughout this afternoon, with some sunny spells, especially in the west. More cloud across the east, with a chance of some showers for North Sea coasts. This afternoon across East Anglia there will be some showers for Norfolk and Suffolk coasts. It will be a drier day further inland, with sunny spells possible anywhere across the region. For southern England it will be a dry afternoon with some patchy cloud around. There will be some bright and sunny spells also. It will feel warm in the sunshine. Showers will continue this evening across parts of Scotland, with clear spells developing in southern and western England. And that's how the weather is shaping up for the rest of the day.
On Monday, we as the United Kingdom gather to mourn, pay tribute and give thanks to Queen Elizabeth II. Here at GB News, we invite you to gather with Anne Diamond, historian David Starkey, and myself, Alastair Stewart, live from Buckingham Palace, Westminster Abbey and Windsor Castle, all day Monday.
Good afternoon, this is Real Britain with me, Emily Carver, on TV, radio and online. Here's what's coming up on the show this afternoon. We'll be keeping you up to date, of course, with live coverage of the Queen's lying in state as world leaders and heads of state begin to arrive in London in preparation for the Queen's funeral. We'll also be speaking to former London MEP Lance Foreman, who was one of the lucky few to meet King Charles on his surprise visit to the Kew this afternoon. I'll also be speaking to sports broadcaster Aidan McGee about this weekend's sports fixtures and on why Celtic and Rangers have been at the centre of controversy this week. We'll get the latest on the war in Ukraine. Ukraine launched a successful counter-offensive this week against Russia. We'll ask what that means for Vladimir Putin. That's what we're talking about for the next hour. Please do get in touch. Perhaps you're listening or watching on YouTube, standing in the queue, waiting to see the Queen lie in state as we speak. Please do tweet me at GB News, or you can email me on gbviews@gbnews.uk. So let's start the show by crossing straight over to Buckingham Palace to speak to our political editor, Darren McCaffrey. Darren, have you been there all morning and afternoon? I know there were sightings of King Charles III and also his son.
Yeah, indeed. Well, they went on that walkabout, didn't they, in South London, or just over the River Thames in Lambeth, right next to Lambeth Palace. If people are familiar with geography, London geography, the reason they were there was to say thank you, fundamentally, to the people who've been queuing up for hours and hours and hours in their attempt to go and see the Queen, who's lying in state, of course, at Westminster Hall. Both the new Prince of Wales, Prince William, and the new King Charles III, there for about 30 minutes, shaking as many hands as they could, talking to lots of people who were clearly very thankful that they had turned up to say thanks. But you're right in saying that the King is now back in Buckingham Palace, and we every so often actually get to see some cars go in and out that seem to be from kind of different countries, because we have to remember that lots of foreign leaders are arriving or have arrived here in London ahead of the funeral on Monday. We're expecting a gathering like we've not really seen before, or certainly not since the state funeral of Winston Churchill back in 1965. Some 500 leaders, princes and princesses, kings and queens, prime ministers and presidents. Everyone from Joe Biden to Emmanuel Macron to the vice president of China is expected by Monday. But as I say, some of them have already arrived. Liz Truss, for example, is meeting, the new prime minister, meeting with the prime minister of Australia and New Zealand later on today at Chevening. And we saw actually just into our down, didn't we, in the queue to see the Queen's coffin in Westminster Hall yesterday. And there is an expectation that actually many of the world leaders, while they may not be queuing up for hours and hours and hours, will get a chance to file by that coffin at some stage over the next 28 hours or so. And they will also go to Lancaster House, which is just down the road here, to sign a book of condolence. But it is a chance for them to meet the new king as well. He's going to host a reception here at Buckingham Palace tomorrow night for those 500 dignitaries expected at the funeral on Monday. I think aside from that, aside from the politics, and we'll see lots more of that tomorrow because Liz Truss is going to meet certain leaders in Downing Street, including Joe Biden, Justin Trudeau, the Canadian Prime Minister, the Irish Taoiseach Micheál Martin, the Polish President, President Duda. Aside from that, what's been fascinating today is just the sheer numbers of people here in central London. As you say, I've been here since before 7 a.m. this morning. And I was here last weekend, and the crowd seems substantially bigger this weekend. It's not just the queue down there along London's South Bank of the Thames to try and get into Westminster Hall. There's a queue of people trying to get as close to the gates of Buckingham Palace as possible. There's another queue at the Green Park to try and lay floral tributes to Her Majesty the Queen. And there is a sense that people are being drawn here to central London from different parts of the United Kingdom, from different parts of the world, to be part of this, to be part of this moment in our nation's history, frankly, to be part of history itself. And for whatever reason, it is extraordinary, the tens, maybe hundreds of thousands of people who have found themselves in London today.
And Darren, there were preparations last night, were there not, under the cover of the night, rehearsals for the state funeral?
Yeah, indeed. We saw this earlier on in the week, didn't we? The night before the Queen's coffin was moved from Buckingham Palace to Westminster Hall, there was a full dress rehearsal. As you say, there was another one last night for the funeral itself. I'm sure there will be, again, last-minute preparations tonight and indeed Sunday night. This is a funeral like none other. It's a proper state funeral. There is a lot of moving parts to it. A lot of military personnel are involved that will need to be done to military precision. And so, yes, they are clearly practicing this. The plans have been drawn up many, many years ago, being finessed over the last couple of years. But they do want to get it right on the day, on Monday. And that is why I think you'll see, as I say, those preparations continue. But this is an incredible logistical and security exercise, not just for our armed forces, but also for the Metropolitan Police and indeed police forces who've been called in from different parts of the country. I saw earlier on in the footage of Prince William and King Charles meeting the crowds. There were police there from Wales. I've certainly met some police from Merseyside today as well. And on top of that, the stewards, and we must not forget the hundreds, thousands of stewards who are doing their part in different parts of the capital today, trying to ensure that everyone here has as good a time as they possibly can, but also a safe time as well.
Darren, very quickly, before we have to leave our conversation, sadly, what will be expected of Liz Truss, the new Prime Minister?
Well, I think in many ways this is not a test for her, but it's an opportunity, it must be said, to get to meet some of these world leaders. Now, she has been Foreign Secretary for the last couple of years. She will, of course, be familiar with many of the people that may well come in and out of Downing Street over the next 24 hours or so, or indeed who will be at the funeral. But it is a different level that when you are the Prime Minister, and many of these meetings will be with world leaders clearly for the first time for her. And that's why I say this, that, clearly they're here for the funeral. They're here to remember and to mark the passing of Her Majesty the Queen, but also this is an opportunity for the UK to flex some of that soft power that's so vital in diplomacy, and it will be an opportunity for Liz Truss to be part of that, to build up relations with these leaders that she's going to have to interact with in the weeks, months and years ahead. And the kind of slightly frustrating thing from our point of view is that we're not really going to get a sense of what they've talked about because the government is in a period of national mourning. These aren't viewed as official bilats, so we won't get the full details of what was discussed. But as I say, it will be a crucial moment for Liz Truss to start out to build up those relations, but it is an opportunity as well because, frankly, prime ministers don't get to meet other world leaders that often, and yet she will have that opportunity today and tomorrow to meet some of the most powerful people on the planet by the opportune event that they happen to be in London this weekend.
Thank you very much, Darren. That was GB News political editor Darren McCaffrey, live from Buckingham Palace, of course. Now, Charles, I've got Charles Ray in the studio with me. Thank you very much for joining us on this another momentous day of royal coverage, of course. Now, Darren was talking about the state occasions coming up, the state reception, and so on. Who do we know that's coming, and are there notable exemptions there?
Well, there are notable exceptions, in effect, but as I understand it, Prince Harry and Meghan have been uninvited, which is a bit strange. I think they were invited, but it's been made clear by palace officials that it should only be working royals who should be there.
Yes, do we think that they were... It was reported that they've been disinvited.
Yes.
Is that so, or is it more the case that they never were invited?
I think you're right. I think it's probably that they were never invited in the first place, because I think the people who represent the Duke of Sussex put out on Twitter, which is their usual mode of transport, that they were invited to this. And then we were then told that they wouldn't be there. So we'll have the working members of the royal family, down to Edward and Sophie Wessex. Obviously, the Prince and Princess of Wales will be there. And all these world leaders all in the same room, all chatting away and all munching on the canapes or canapes.
On the canapes. And in terms of foreign leaders, now there's been controversy, of course, over the Chinese contingent. Apparently, we now know that the Vice President of the Chinese Communist Party, presumably, will be present. How do you feel about that? How do you think that will be represented when it comes to public opinion?
Well, we've already got people jumping up and down about the likes of the Vice President of China coming, because it's the Communist Party, and our relationships with China haven't been great. There's also a row over Saudi Arabia, the Saudi Arabian prince over, because of Adnan Khashoggi, the allegations that he was involved in that. So we've already seen some protests on social media already, and I suspect we'll carry on seeing those protests for various people. But the vast majority of the leaders who'll be here and their representatives will get a warm reception. And
we've got a huge number of foreign royalty.
Yes.
Coming.
Don't start asking me to name them, because
I won't get out some kind of map of all of them here, some family tree. But there will be many present and correct.
There will be. I think the King of Spain is also going to be... This King Carlos, Juan Carlos of Spain, whose son is now King of Spain, I think he's going to be here as well. So he's obviously... very friendly with the royals, has been for many, many years, obviously. So all these European royals will be coming over as well. So it's going to be a rarely seen crowd reception.
Spectacle.
It really is a spectacle. I mean, it's got to be the hottest ticket in town.
Very much so. And I do wonder how this looks on the global stage. People often talk down our country, and it's something that... irks a lot of people who are very proud to be British, very proud of royalty, proud of the institution of our constitutional monarchy. Does this shine a light on Britain and actually say to people, we do have global influence still? Yes,
we do, and you're absolutely right. Look, it's unfortunate the Queen has died. It's fortunate we've got a new king. Britain is great. It's shown us in the best possible light. Look at all the people that have turned up. It's just fantastic. But... let's not forget, Emily, we still have got some problems. We still have got some serious problems that need to be sorted. And, we will be back to shouting and fighting with each other over those serious problems in about, what, a week to 2 weeks' time?
Well, this is very interesting because I was reading today that Mark Drakeford, who is the Welsh First Minister, I believe his title is, apparently he revealed some details of a conversation he's had with King Charles in the last couple of days. And he said that Prince Charles was concerned about the cost of living crisis, about what this winter would look ahead. Surely, from the Welsh side, that's not very good protocol to reveal conversations, but is that the sort of thing that Charles, as king, can be seen to get involved in? Is that too political, or is that something that is general enough to be said by a monarch?
I don't think it is too political, because I think it just goes to show that the king is as concerned about the future, about these problems that we've got, as we all are. We're all worrying about what's going to be the cost of our gas and electricity. We're all worrying about train strikes. They're all going to be happening. But I still think that the king will be making his point of view felt at those weekly meetings with the Prime Minister and any other cabinet ministers that he meets. They are private meetings in the same way as the Queen had these private meetings. And I'm sure she just didn't sit there and not say anything.
Yes, but they must remain private. They must remain private. Now, on a similar vein, we're going to cross over to Westminster and speak to GB News political correspondent Tom Harwood. Tom Harwood's there on College Green, I think. We can see him there. So, Tom, it's a huge week ahead in the world of politics after the state funeral on Monday. It's a huge week. We've got a massive fiscal event on Friday. We've got the Bank of England meeting, which may see a further hike in interest rates. Will it be back to business as usual?
Gosh, it is so very difficult for Parliament, really, in the next few days, because we're not seeing normal parliamentary business. Of course, there's only been a handful of days since before the summer recess that Parliament has been able to sit, that business has been able to be done. And of course, it's not just what happens in the chamber of the House of Commons, the big set-piece events, Prime Minister's questions and the like that we all know so well, but it's also the bill committees and all of the backroom work that goes on in the Palace of Westminster to make governance and government function. It's a very, very difficult situation, really, for a new Prime Minister, for a new government of whose ministers haven't all been appointed yet. Of course, these ministerial appointments are recommended by the executive, recommended by the Prime Minister, but approved by the monarch, and none of that is happening during the period of national mourning. So a huge task on the hands of this government. Of course, it feels like a lot longer ago, but it was only last Thursday that the massive announcement on energy bills was made, of course interrupted in the media cycle by the seismic events of Her late Majesty's passing just a few hours later. But clearly this government wants to get on with its job, wants to make sure that things are happening. Now, this Wednesday we understand that there is no Prime Minister's questions, there is no parliamentary business in the House. Indeed, Wednesday will be reserved for the signing in, the swearing in of members of the House of Commons. We had some senior members of Parliament swear an oath of allegiance to the King at the weekend, and further, at last weekend I should say, and further MPs will have the opportunity to swear or affirm their new oath to the King this coming Wednesday. But it does really shorten the days where Parliament can sit, because of course from this coming weekend, a week from now, party conference season starts. First with the Labour Party conference in Liverpool, and the following weekend the Conservative Party conference down in Birmingham starts as well. It looks like the recess will be curtailed after the Conservative Party conference, a week shorter than it was originally planned for. But yes, only a handful of days, really, Thursday and Friday this coming week, where business can be done.
Tom, I was going to ask you about party conferences, because there's been quite a lot of debate over whether they should go ahead, considering, as you say, the amount of days that have been lost. Are we preparing for them to go ahead as normal? Well, yes, with one exception.
The Liberal Democrats Party conference was meant to begin tomorrow, of course, in the midst of the period of national mourning, one of its key days being Monday, the day of the funeral of Her Majesty the Queen. So the Liberal Democrats have cancelled their party conference, whereas the Labour Party conference, which began a week later, indeed I should say, begins a week later from next weekend, that is going ahead because it's outside the period of national mourning. There was some rumour about the conference recess being cancelled or curtailed in some way. Well, I can report it hasn't been cancelled, but it's likely to be curtailed, i.e. it will last for 2 weeks from this weekend through the next and the next, but stop after the Conservative Party conference, whereas before it could have gone on for an extra week. It seems like the conference recess will last for 2 weeks just to cover those periods of the Labour Party and then the Conservative Party conference. But these conferences will feel differently to how they felt in recent years. Of course, the long shadow of the reign of Queen Elizabeth II will be cast over these conferences, but also we are expecting this fiscal event, this mini budget to take place towards the end of next week, and that will really set the agenda for what people are talking about, how things will be paid for, which taxes will be cut, what kind of economy are we looking at for the years ahead. That will all be cast just a couple of days before the Labour Party take to their conference. Perhaps that will cast a long shadow over the Labour Party conference as well. It seems like politics is moving at such a rapid pace at this time, and yes, we will be seeing the most busy of periods for members of Parliament. Let's not forget, it was only last week that Boris Johnson was Prime Minister and Queen Elizabeth II was the monarch, and that changed so quickly. We had first a Prime Minister's questions, then a seismic, huge energy announcement capping the bills of people up and down the United Kingdom, and businesses, I should say, too. But then, of course, this period of national mourning, the world leaders coming to London the world over, Monday being this focal point for potentially billions of people watching what's going on in Westminster Abbey around the world, and then rattling on through right back into business of the House of Commons into next week, and then Labour Party conference across that weekend and the beginning of the further week, and then the next weekend Conservative Party conference and the beginning of the next week. People in politics will not have slept for a month.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you very much for bringing us up to date on all the political news and what we can expect after the state funeral when business gets back to near usual in Parliament. Thank you very much, Tom. That was Tom, of course, our political correspondent. Now, in the studio with me, we have Ada McGee, who's going to bring us up to date with all that's going on in sports. Now, there was a little bit of controversy over the week, was there not, when it came to football fixtures?
There was indeed. Well, Rangers was interesting in Scotland because I think their fan base, is fair to say, would be very pro-monarchist, very royalist, very unionist section of our support, of the football congregation, if you like. Now, they had a Champions League game against Napoli at Ibrox in the week. UEFA decreed earlier in the week that there would be a period of convalescence, there would be silence in the stadium to reflect the fact that it wouldn't be a celebratory mood, certainly not around football stadia. Everyone observed this, apart from Rangers. They felt that they had to play the national anthem. So officially, the playing of the national anthem before the match was outlawed by UEFA. So it seemed a little bit draconian, but nonetheless, Rangers took matters into their own hands and decided to play it nonetheless.
Are Rangers known for being punchy? I
wouldn't necessarily say that. I mean, you probably describe them as Charles maybe concur here, more of a conservative kind of club, really, maybe a club that doesn't do things against the grain. But they felt so strongly about this that they did it nonetheless. Now, they played it, and I think there would have been uproar from their supporters had they not been allowed to do it. I mean, some of the tributes there were quite spectacular on the eye, I must say, both outside and inside the ground. There was a wonderful kind of mosaic display behind the goal. And I think they just risked the fine because, I mean, they've probably seen some of the fines that UEFA hand out for racism offences and see they sometimes amount to about 10 grand or something like that, because the sort of money that footballers...
Just pennies.
Well, it's probably the money, loose change in a player's back pocket. Yes. So, but to be fair to UEFA, though, having decreed that, and with Rangers having gone against the grain, I think they recognised from a PR point of view it would be a silly thing to do to try and impose a fine on Rangers, and they announced in the last 24 hours that they wouldn't be fining Rangers for it. And there was a massive, the actual sound of the God Save the King was something to behold. It really was. In fact, to be fair to Chelsea, I mean, their fans kind of burst out anyway. It just wasn't given an official lead by the club. And the same as Manchester City, they were both turned down, and they honoured the UEFA's wishes.
Well, for a lot of fans, I imagine it feels the natural thing to do is to burst out into song. I mean, football clubs have so many anthems, and the national anthem is one that unifies most people.
Yeah, exactly.
How about fixtures this weekend? Is everything back to normal? Will there be tributes? Will there be silences? What can we expect?
There will be. It's getting back to normal. We had 2 matches last night. We had Aston Villa, for example. There was a kind of circular spotlight put on the centre circle while the players observed the minute's silence. There was a picture of Her Majesty up on the Jumbotron screens. Prince William was in contact, the Duke of Cambridge, with Aston Villa beforehand. Stephen Gerrard said afterwards that it was great to hear from him giving everything he's going through. Meanwhile, there were similar observances at the Nottingham Forest against Fulham match, which Fulham won 1-3-2 to move up to 6th in the league. Today, we're seeing postponements as well. Chelsea has bitten the dust because I think most of the morning was concentrated on the west of London, and so the policing provision for that game against Liverpool was it was good to have that out of the way, I think, and they'll rearrange that game. Brighton against Crystal Palace was a really interesting one because although it's 54 miles away from London, we had a situation where this game was actually called off a few weeks ago because of planned rail strikes. So when the rail strikes were off, in view of what happened with the Queen, there was talk that the game might get back on. But then the police decided that they wouldn't be able to rearrange the provision quite so quickly. So this game now, incredibly, is probably going to be played next year.
Next year?
Because we've got a World Cup in the middle of in November, right in the middle of the season. So given Champions League commitments, given international commitments, we're into an international break now. We're running out of space to play these fixtures. So probably we'll play next year, believe it or not. Yeah.
Now, what I was thinking while you were talking was the deployment of police. Of course, there are so many needed in the capital, also around the country where there are different royal events.
Well, yeah, we have to consider.
And then add to that sports fixtures, which, as we know, can get quite rowdy and require security.
Yeah, they can. I mean, people don't realise. I mean, there were games postponed last weekend. I mean, you consider West Ham would attract a crowd of 60,000. Arsenal was due to play at home against Everton. That would have attracted 60,000. Man United were in town at Crystal Palace. That's another 30,000. QPR were at home on a Saturday. Fulham were due to play Chelsea on the Saturday. That's 45,000 people within 2.5 miles of each other. So these things can't be just done on the back of a fag packet. They have to be rearranged properly. Obviously, if we look back to last Saturday, the Queen only died, 24 hours before? So we're talking about hasty arrangements here. A lot of the time, these organisations, including football clubs, including the police, were criticised for not making decisions quickly enough, but it's a hell of an imposition. And
controversial decisions have to be made, because a decision has to be made, whether it comes to protocols or policing or whether events go ahead, and it's never going to please everyone, is it?
No, I mean, we look at, say, the amount of times I've covered stories down the years where Arsenal or Chelsea or Tottenham were criticised for planning a victory parade ahead of an FA Cup final or a European final, and everyone says, well, they're a bit cocky, aren't they? Because they're assuming they're going to win. Well, yes, that's true, but they need organising. These things need organising. These can be attended. If Arsenal have got 60,000 home fans and they win the FA Cup, chances are 40 or 50,000 people could turn up the following day if there was a victory parade. So the police are damned if they do and damned if they don't. And as are the clubs and as are the organisations. I think overall, yes, football looked like outliers in terms of how they tended to postpone and withdraw into themselves as opposed to other sports which decided to go ahead. But as I say, they probably could have communicated more with other sports, but damned if you do, damned if you don't. And mistakes are sometimes going to be made when things are arranged in haste.
Yes, exactly. We have to be thoughtful of that.
We do.
Thank you very much. There was lots more I wanted to talk to you about, but we need to
Sorry, I keep rabbiting on, I'm sorry.
So we're going to speak to GBNews reporter Jeff Moody, who is currently in the queues to visit the Queen's lying in state. Jeff, what an afternoon for people queuing there.
Oh, I know. It's been incredible. We've been here since 9:30 this morning when we started off. We were a feeling of dread when we started because we were being told that it was 25 hours, but we're 4 or 5 hours in and we're told that we've only got 6 hours to go. I've never been so pleased in my life at the thought of queuing up for 6 hours. We've just gone past Tower Bridge. We're going past at the moment the Belfast, that incredible ship. There is a great atmosphere, as we know. We've heard lots of stories of people in the queues and what a lovely atmosphere it is, and it really is. People along the route are opening up their houses for people to go to the toilet, which is incredible. You can literally just walk into somebody's house and use their toilet. Let's see if we can chat to somebody here. Who would like to say hello? You go, hello. How are you getting on? Are you enjoying the walk?
Yeah.
Good. How are you doing, madam? No, she doesn't want to talk. Hello.
Hello.
Hello. How's it going? Are you enjoying the walk?
Yeah.
Good, good, good. Are you tired yet?
No, so good. A little way to go yet.
How long do you think it's going to take us from here?
I don't know. Apparently it's 20, but I'm hoping it's going to be 7.
I think it'll be a lot less than 20. I hope, anyway. Hello.
Hello.
What brings you here today?
To see the Queen's coffin.
And how's the walk been so far?
Tiring.
Tiring? There's a long way to go.
Yeah.
It's too early to be tired. What made you decide to come up today?
I just think that we all should show our respects to the Queen. Yeah, definitely. She's done a great job.
Have you thought about how you might react, how you might feel when you're actually in there?
Oh, I don't know. Yeah, probably overwhelmed, I would think, yeah.
Yeah, it's weird, isn't it? Because there's such a great atmosphere coming along here and walking along and the sun's shining and it's all really jovial. But then suddenly the mood is going to change a bit, isn't it?
Yeah, but I do think our children should see it, so that's why he's here with me today.
So you're here to live a little part of history, young man.
Yes.
How exciting is that?
Very exciting.
One day you'll be able to tell your children and grandchildren all about that.
Yeah.
That's what Mum said, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Definitely.
Very nice to talk to you.
Thank you.
All right.
Keep an eye on your feet. Make sure they're all right.
Young one.
Young one. It really is a very, excuse me. It really is a very good atmosphere down here, and everyone is certainly working with each other to make sure everybody's all right. You know, people nip off and get coffees for everybody, and as I say, people are opening up their doors to use the toilet. So far, it's a very, very good atmosphere. Certainly no moaning yet, but we have got quite a few hours to go.
Now, Jeff, did you catch sight of King Charles and Prince William, who went to greet some of those waiting so many hours in the queue?
I haven't done, no, not yet. They weren't where we were, but we did hear all about them. People were watching it on their phones and saying, oh, I wonder which part of the queue he is in. It would be nice to think that that we would see him at some point, but we're sort of thinking we might have been able to time it so that we get there at roughly the time that the grandchildren are there. That is something that's spurring people on. They're looking at their watches and they're saying, do you know, with a fair wind, we might be there at roughly that time, which of course would be the icing on the cake.
Joining us, that was GBNews reporter Jeff Moody from, I believe that was Tower Bridge, which is only partway down the queue. Of course, we'll be talking to Lance Foreman, who is a former London MEP, who did meet King Charles in the queue and shook his hand, I think, perhaps, and also saw Prince William. Now, you're with GB News on TV, radio and online. Next, we'll be discussing Scottish independence, as polling shows that the death of the Queen and subsequent commemorations are unlikely to move the needle on Scottish independence. Before we get into all of that, it's time for a check on the news headlines with Alice Porter.
It's 2:30. I'm Alice Porter in the GB newsroom. The King and Prince of Wales have made a surprise visit, greeting people in the queue to see the Queen lying in state. Hundreds of people cheered as King Charles arrived to speak to those who've been waiting in line in South London. They offered their condolences to the King and Prince William, who thanked the crowd for standing in the cold throughout the night so that they could pay their respects to the late monarch. The Prince of Wales could be heard asking them how long they'd been waiting for. The government website currently suggests the wait time is up to 16.5 hours. Earlier, the King and Prince of Wales visited the Met Police Special Operations Room. King Charles was greeted by the new Commissioner, Sir Mark Rowley, Home Secretary Suella Braverman and London Mayor Sadiq Khan. Both he and Prince William thanked emergency service staff for their work during the period of mourning. The security operation for the state funeral on Monday is set to be the biggest in the Met Police Force's history, surpassing the London Olympics. Later today, Queen Elizabeth's grandchildren will stand guard around her coffin in Westminster Hall. Last night, the late monarch's children, King Charles, the Princess Royal, Duke of York and the Earl of Wessex, held their own 15-minute vigil, honouring their mother. Prince Harry has been given special dispensation by his father to wear his military uniform despite no longer being a working royal. Prince Andrew had been given the same permission. World leaders have started arriving ahead of the state funeral, with around 500 dignitaries expected to attend. A number have visited Westminster Hall to pay their respects, including the Canadian Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau. New Zealand's Jacinda Ardern also attended the Queen's lying in state, as well as the Australian Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese. Rehearsals for the funeral were held in Windsor in the early hours of the morning, with the procession moving down the long walk towards the castle gates. Royal pageant master Bruno Peake says a lot of planning has gone into the event.
Rehearsal side is the element that will 99.9% guarantee that you will have a successful event. And again, these guys and these ladies who are actually taking part, well, you know, in the military, this will be such a proud moment for them. So they're going to be making sure that they don't put a step wrong.
In other news, Ukraine says the mass grave discovered in the eastern city of Izium is proof of Russia's war crimes. More than 450 bodies, most of them civilians, were found, some with their hands tied behind their backs. The city was recently liberated after 6 months of Russian occupation. The Kremlin denies it's targeting civilians or committing war crimes. The White House says it'll continue to support Ukraine and hold Moscow accountable. This is what spokesman John Kirby had to say.
It's horrifying. It's repugnant. And sadly, it's in keeping with the kind of depravity and the brutality with which Russian forces have been prosecuting this war against Ukraine and the Ukrainian people. And we're going to continue to actively support efforts to document war crimes and atrocities that Russian forces commit in Ukraine and to assist national and international efforts to identify and hold Russians accountable.
Police investigators are looking at whether race was a factor in the fatal shooting of Chris Cabba by an armed officer in South London. The 24-year-old's family say they're angry that the investigation by the police regulator could take as long as 9 months. Mr. Cabba, who was unarmed, was killed following a police pursuit of his car 2 weeks ago. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens.
Welcome back to GB News. Now, throughout this hour, I'll be joined in the studio by Charles Ray, who is former royal correspondent at The Sun, and we're also joined by the royal broadcaster, Rafe Haydel-Manco. Thank you very much for joining us this evening. Now, Rafe, what did you make of that surprise visit to the queue for the Queen lying in state? All those people managed to meet King Charles.
I was hoping it would happen. I was expecting it to happen, and so I'm relieved that it happened, because if you know, the people in the queue, you can say, are almost the Praetorian Guard of the royal family. I mean, that's dedication and devotion, and it deserves a royal visit of its own. I mean, the queue now, we're told, has its own section on the BBC weather forecast, along with Basildon and Reading. You now have the queue, and so you can always consider this a royal visit to the queue.
It is rather lovely. Does this tell us something about how King Charles will be as our new monarch?
Well, we've really seen, I think, the style of the monarchy emerging here when we saw His Majesty stop his car at the gates of Buckingham Palace. We're so used to that car just driving straight through, and His Majesty impromptu got out to have a royal walkabout and to greet his new subjects. And the warmth of the reception he received, as well as the clear pleasure it took him to meet his crowds, I think shows that this will be a much more intimate royal family. We know that from his time as Prince of Wales. We know that also from the life of the current Prince of Wales as Duke of Cambridge, how much they want to actually engage with the public to a degree, a much further degree than the Queen did, because they are a younger, more modern generation.
Charles, do you think this is an acceptance that we live in a modern world and people expect a more public-facing monarchy, a more intimate monarchy?
I think Rafe is absolutely right. I'm like him. I didn't expect both of them, but I was certainly expecting one of them to come down and just pay, you know, respects to the crowd standing there, and have been standing there for God knows how many hours. And I just think this is a continuation of how Prince Charles when he was Prince of Wales, conducted himself when he was meeting people. Certainly, we've seen Prince William and Catherine, and they are really touchy-feely with the people. You know, they've tried to get away and do away with the protocol of bowing and scraping and everything else. Yes, we're seeing a much, much more modern monarchy in operation.
And how does Prince William's role change now that he's Prince of Wales? Does he have to step up in any new way?
Well, we saw the King almost lay down the gauntlet as a challenge to his son in his opening speech when he said that he hasn't got time to carry on the interests and charities that he has hitherto dedicated himself, and that it was now up to the new Prince of Wales to take up that baton. But certainly we've seen the Duke of Cambridge really doing the apprenticeship work for Prince of Wales in the last few years. As Duke of Cambridge, his causes on mental health and in sport and so forth really, I think, are setting the tone for how he will be as Prince of Wales. We're very lucky to have had in King Charles as Prince of Wales and in Prince William two men who are actually dedicated and are sincere about improving the lot of lives in this country, rather than being Playboy princes in Monte Carlo on the casinos. You know, so
they do appear to be so. They do appear to care deeply about their duty to this country, and that is reflected in their actions, like going down to the queue and meeting those who've been waiting God knows how many hours. My sister turned up at the queue at 5 p.m. yesterday. She finally saw the Queen's coffin at 5 a.m. this morning. 12 hours. She had friends come to visit her with some hot food, keep her company, but she said she wasn't bored. It wasn't too laborious. There was an atmosphere. And so now I feel a sense of guilt that I have not made the same trip. But I'm glad that one member of the family did take the time to go down there and represent the Carvers, at least. Charles, what do you think? We talk about King Charles, we talk about how he'll be as a monarch. What will he have to give up?
I think he'll have to give up, well, as he said in his speech, he hasn't got time to be involved with the same amount of charities and work that he had as Prince of Wales. So those will now be dispensed down. You know, the new Prince of Wales will get some of the other members of the royal family will also get other things. He's obviously got to take over an awful lot of things that the Queen used to do, like meeting the Prime Minister once a week, like reading all these state papers. There's a whole load of things that he has to do in the background that we don't see. So it's a big, big job he's got. And we've discussed this before, Rafe, and he's had a 70-year apprenticeship ready for this, just as William's had an apprenticeship to take over from the Duchy of Cornwall.
Now, I've seen some, what I find quite insulting conversations going on in the media by Republicans talking about how it's such an easy job to be the monarch. All you have to do is sit and look elegant and go to banquets and essentially do nothing. There doesn't seem to be an appreciation of the duty that is involved and the long hours and the commitments. How hard is it to be monarch of this country?
Well, all I'd say is Her Majesty should have retired 30 years ago.
Yes,
right?
grueling
She
work.
has continued for 3 decades beyond the average age of retirement. And lest people think that all her time out of the public eye is simply kept, you know, watching daytime soap operas. The royal boxes come every day, and Her Majesty diligently went through all of those boxes. Yes, her mobility issues prevented her from attending lots of functions, but because of the modern age of digital technology, she was able to receive ambassadors and the letters of credence from ambassadors via the television screen. She was able to actually hold her last couple of Privy Council meetings via the internet. So this is a lady who has been dedicated her entire life. She made an oath and a pledge when she was 21, and she has kept to that oath all these years later.
And what would you say to those who don't seem to, this is to both of you really, who don't seem to appreciate how important the monarchy is to most Britons? Some people simply cannot get their head around why we would admire our monarch or our monarchy as an institution.
Well, with the greatest respect, I wouldn't pay any attention to them whatsoever, to be perfectly honest. I mean, I
worry about the younger generations.
I think, well, you just look at those crowds. There's a lot of the younger generation are well represented in those crowds, and you see those people. And there was a lovely situation a few minutes ago when we were looking at the coffin, and there was a young girl there, and tears were streaming down her eyes just as she was looking at the coffin. This is a very emotional time for us, and I just think that we have shown how much of a monarchy we are. And
Sorry to interrupt, but these cars leaving Buckingham Palace, do we know who is in those cars? Any ideas?
I haven't looked at the screens for a couple of minutes. So I didn't quite catch.
Well,
but there are meetings taking place, certainly with governors general today and various other dignitaries who are holding meetings, and we know that His Majesty the King has met with the chiefs of staff and the defence staff as well today, because of course he is commander-in-chief. The armies are loyal to him. But I would just pick up on the point that you made. The problem we have today is a lack of education about civic institutions in general. People don't know what the purpose of the House of Lords is. People don't understand why the monarchy exists. And you can't really fault the children when they're not being taught this in schools. And you're seeing this even, for example, in the decline in the number of people who are voting Conservative amongst the youth. If the last general election had been held by those who were under 25, Jeremy Corbyn would have had a landslide of victory and there wouldn't have been a single Conservative MP. This is a ticking time bomb that the Tory party haven't addressed, but it also plays into the perceptions of the monarchy. There is a failure in our teacher training colleges and in our system of education to actually just explain to people why we have these institutions, and so it's no surprise to me that you do get reactions like this.
Well, it's not surprising because a lot of our teachers in our schools now were taught under, well, in the Blair years, where the curriculum changed and we lost perhaps some sense of patriotism, although, as Charles says, it does seem to be alive and kicking among the majority of our population and of all ethnicities and religious backgrounds too, it seems. Now, we're going to move on. Professor Sir John Curtis, one of the UK's leading pollsters, says that the Queen's death is unlikely to have an impact on the Scottish independence debate. This comes, of course, as thousands of Scots are lining the streets to see Her Majesty's coffin and queuing to see her lying at rest. So will the death of Queen Elizabeth II help strengthen the Union, or will it make little difference? Now, to discuss Sir John's comments, I'm joined by former SNP councillor Austin Sheridan. Austin, we know that the Queen had a deep love for Scotland, so did you find it fitting that she passed there?
Absolutely, and it gave the people of Scotland a unique chance to mourn. The fact that the Queen lay in state in Edinburgh, our capital city, giving citizens in Scotland the chance to go and pay their final respect, I thought was very, very nice. And when it comes to the independence debate, as I say, there's people who support independence, that had great admiration for Her Majesty the Queen. We've seen in the Scottish Parliamentary Chamber when the First Minister moved the motion of condolence, that the entire chamber united across unionists, across nationalist lines in sending condolences and standing shoulder to shoulder with people in our country who are mourning the passing of the Queen.
Now, I can't help but think that perhaps Nicola Sturgeon should leave her quest for independence for a little while at least, in light of the strong unionist feeling that there has been. And I do think the Queen's death has increased support, or at least more acknowledgement of the importance of the Union. Do you not see that at all?
No, because during the 2014 independence referendum, what people were focused on was how we can put money in people's pockets. People were focused on the economic arguments, the environmental arguments. The monarchy wasn't something that came up on the doorstep, most likely being the reason that it's actually SNP policy to retain the monarchy as head of state. If you look at the Commonwealth, right, which is a collection of independent countries, Canada, New Zealand, Australia, just a few to come to hand, is that they're independent. I don't think any of them want to give up their independence, but they also appreciate their ties to the monarchy and the shared culture that they have with people in the United Kingdom. And I don't see why Scotland, as an independent country, would be any different.
But King Charles made a very clear attempt to visit all corners of the United Kingdom and show his respect for the Union, how important it is to the monarch. Now, I have family in Scotland who are unionists, and they will have seen the coffin and the procession go through parts of Scotland, go through Banchory, go through all different parts of Scotland. That happens to be where they live, in Banchory near Aberdeen. And I do feel that there is such support out there among the Scottish people, and considering we had a referendum pretty recently, only a matter of a few years ago, that perhaps out of respect for that union, out of respect of the outpouring of emotion towards the monarch and towards Britain as a united kingdom, that perhaps we should leave that to rest?
But we can't confuse the admiration that people in Scotland had for Her Majesty the Queen and link that to the question for independence, because that would be like saying that people that support independence somehow don't support the monarchy or support the Queen or respect the Queen as much as someone who doesn't support the Union. I mean, and let's also be clear that there are people in Scotland that support the Union that don't support the monarchy. So it really isn't a clear-cut issue that if you support the monarchy, you must automatically have some sort of admiration for the political union. As I says, there's people, and we've watched broadcasts on our news channels. We've visited Australia and Canada, other parts of the Commonwealth, that have got great admiration for Her Majesty the Queen, who's just sadly passed away. But none of them are suggesting that because of that, they want to give up their independence and join up the United Kingdom and a political union, because the two issues are just completely separate.
Sadly, we're not going to see eye to eye on this issue, but thank you very much for joining us on GB News this afternoon. That was Austin Sheridan, who is a former SNP councillor. Thank you very much for your time. I think it's just so sad, Rafe, that this persistence in wanting to break up the union, well, persists.
Yes, you're absolutely right, and that has been one of the great legacies of Her Majesty the Queen, was being the glue that really did keep elements of the Union together. And we remember the only time that she has ever actually dipped a toe slightly into political waters was in 1977 at the Silver Jubilee, when she reminded people at that time, when Scottish nationalism was running rampant, that she remembers that she was crowned Queen of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. And then again in 2014 at the last referendum on independence, when she made what was a very diplomatic statement saying she was hoping that Scots would think very carefully before casting that vote. She knows how strong the Union is and how important it is. And I think that we've seen with the current king, his visits to Scotland, to Wales and Northern Ireland are all efforts to show that the monarchy is not just for England.
And on our screens, for those listening on radio, we have continued pictures of all the crowds outside Buckingham Palace. There seem to be hundreds, if not thousands, of people waiting there. I wonder, Charles, whether we'll reach the 1 million mark in terms of people queuing to see the Queen lying in state.
I think we will certainly see that 1 million mark.
Not that you've been counting, Charles.
No, I've been counting, a bit difficult counting, but when you think that at the lying in state of the Queen Mother, 200,000 people marched past. When we had Princess Diana's funeral, there was no lying in state, but 1 million people turned out into the streets to see the coffin as it left with the Westminster Abbey and travelled up to Althorpe. So we don't know yet how many people have filed past the Queen's coffin. It looks like it's been a horrendous amount of people have gone down there and spent... If you've got to go down there and spend 16 hours or whatever just in a queue, that is some devotion. That is want to be part of that history.
It really is. Sorry,
I should just say we are seeing the Prince of Wales now in the crowds outside Buckingham Palace shaking hands.
Of course we are, yes.
About 10 minutes ago, during your last interview, we did see Queen Camilla leaving the palace. It looked like with the Princess of Wales by her side. All of this suggests that the luncheon that was being held there this afternoon at 1 o'clock at Buckingham Palace with the King and Queen and the Governors-General, their representatives in Canada, Australia, New Zealand and the other realms, has now concluded.
Well, thank goodness you've got your glasses on today, Ray, because I can barely make out who is there. But isn't that extraordinary for those people who've been waiting there for possibly hours, and now they get to see Prince William, and who else is there, did you say?
Princess of Wales.
Princess of Wales.
The Princess of Wales already left, but I'm not sure that maybe the Countess of Wessex. Or actually, my eyes aren't as good as I thought. That is the Earl and Countess of Wessex. We're seeing now Prince Edward and his wife Sophie.
Oh, how lovely.
As they get older, Prince Edward and Prince William look more and more similar.
Now Sophie has been getting an awful lot of good press recently about her composure, about her relationship with the public, about how she comes across dutiful and so on.
Yes, she is. I mean, I mean, the Queen regarded her as a second daughter, we're being told. She stepped into the breach clearly with Edward when Harry and Meghan decided to up sticks and leave. So they've taken on an awful lot of royal duties. And she is someone who has been quite central, very much like Camilla. Let's not forget about Camilla, who I was reading the other day has broken her toe.
And Sophie, she will be rewarded, will she not, for her for her duty?
Well, in fact, there's an expectation that they both may be rewarded. Following the death of the Duke of Edinburgh, his title merged back into the crown, and there was talk that King Charles would actually bestow the new Dukedom of Edinburgh upon his youngest brother and his wife. We haven't had any declaration of that yet, but certainly it will be a fitting way to pay tribute to a couple who really stepped up to the fray after the departure of the Duke and Duchess of Sussex to America.
Just to remind those who are listening on radio, we're looking at the Buckingham Palace, the outside. We've got the Earl and Countess of Wessex, who are greeting those who have been waiting outside the palace to lay their tributes and to see essentially who passes through Buckingham Palace. And they've had a nice surprise to see those two royals there. And it seems that they're being very friendly, shaking hands, greeting people, chatting away, having a nice time with, of course, lots of police presence there as well.
I think this is another example of the modern royalty. We've got Edward and Sophie out there pressing the flesh and saying hello and thank you very much for turning up, which is more important. I mean, the royals will have been deeply touched by the amount of people who've come down to London to stand outside a palace or to take part in that amazing queue.
I must say, it does make me feel proud to be British, just that sense of unity that you do see with people of all different ages, backgrounds, ethnicities, religious backgrounds also. Some people say that the royal family can be divisive. I, however, see it as if one of the only things that unites us these days.
Well, absolutely, and you only have to look at Her late Majesty's relationship with the Commonwealth to see what support she has from a multiracial background. But also, some critics have said, well, how can we have in the 21st century a monarch who is Supreme Governor of the Church of England? Isn't that exclusive? But if you ask the Chief Rabbi, if you ask leading imams, they say, we would rather have a person of faith than a person of no faith as head of state.
Exactly. Now, we're going to be talking to Rakib Hassan, who is a friend of the show, and he's also a social policy analyst, I believe that's one of his titles, a social commentator anyway, and he's been thinking quite a lot about how, to that very point, how the link between the royal family and the Church of England is important, and also in the eyes of those of all faiths and none. It's something that binds us and something that is very important to our country. Now, in terms of the funeral, there will be many people who wish to be close to the events on Monday. Do you know how many people will be around to see the proceedings, where people will be going? It's at Westminster Abbey, of course.
Well, it's going to be very difficult to get a good view of the funeral or the funeral procession. You would have to get there very early. Lots of routes are being closed off. So your best bet is to actually tune into GB News, I would suggest, for that coverage. But if you are brave enough to, or willing to play the lottery and see how far you'll go, the procession will be a short one on Monday. Westminster Hall is just behind, or just the west doors of Westminster Abbey. They literally are a stone's throw from each other. So the procession from the hall, where Her Majesty is lying in state, to the Abbey will only last for the briefest of moments. But the real procession will be after the funeral, when the funeral cortege will proceed from Westminster Abbey, led by the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, of which Her Majesty was Honorary Commissioner, all the way down, following very much the route that it took the other day when it arrived at Westminster Hall, to Hyde Park Corner and Wellington Arch, where there will be a removal of the coffin into a hearse. And then that's where the public have the greatest opportunity to see the Queen, as she will be driven along the Cromwell Road and essentially all the way out to Windsor.
Well, there we go. Those are the proceedings. Thank you very much, Ray, for that. Now we're going to be talking to a body language expert about some of our royal family and recent events. We saw, of course, Prince William and Harry, who seem to have called truce, perhaps, on their ongoing rift for the sake of their late grandmother, as they stood side by side whilst her coffin was taken to Westminster Hall from Buckingham Palace on Wednesday. Their wives, Kate and Meghan, then stood alongside Camilla and Sophie Wessex as the late Queen's coffin was placed in Westminster Hall to lie in state, all seemingly united in grief. But what did the body language of the royals tell us about the current state of their relationships? To answer this, Judy James, a body language expert, joins me now. Now, were you just watching those last clips there of the Earl and the Countess of Wessex? What do you make of their body language, their relationship with the public? I think we've got the audio. Ah, there we go.
As he comes out to greet the crowds and shares with them, he almost looks slightly bewildered and overwhelmed by what, for him, I think, is an unexpected level of shared love. People are singing God Save the King. And I think this is quite a new experience for him. William, I think, is more empathetic. I think he learned the lesson when his mother's died, his mother's funeral, that the public do want to share, that you can have moments when you're quite open and sharing with your emotions and with your body language as well, and realise that this is very much a human-to-human experience. And there were women in the crowd that were, I think, had probably remembered William when he was a young boy following his mother's coffin and still wanted to be nurturing and slightly maternal, and there were hands rubbing and holding his arm, which was amazing.
Listeners, we're just going to play some pictures of Harry and William standing side by side at the royal procession. I think we have that. Do we have that coming? Well, we'll have it in a moment. But based on what you've seen, Judy, what you've seen of William and Harry together since the Queen's death, what does their body language suggest about the current state of their relationship? Of course, there's been so much media coverage of the tensions between those brothers. What have you noticed?
I think it's so important that they are not allowed to upstage the main event. So I was massively surprised when they suddenly all appeared together, but it was a very good, what's called an intentional statement to make, which is that we can breathe the same air, that we can stand together, that we can do this without arguing or imploding or throwing one another horrible looks. I would say on a scale of any thawing between them, I mean, I think you've got the level of what I call the permafrost of the Commonwealth Service appearance, where it was incredibly frosty, going back to the days when they were quite friendly when the Fab Four first kicked off. It's still extremely chilly, and I loved the way that you could tell from the meeting that it was probably instigated by William. He looked so confident, his chest was puffed. He didn't have, if you remember at Philip's funeral, it actually took Kate to choreograph to get the two brothers together, and you could see her nudging them. We've had Kate using friendly displays with Meghan in the past on Christmas Day once, and what you saw at that particular outing was the fact that William was going to take the lead. He was the one that was going to be very adult in this scenario. Kate, I think, has decided to opt out of the spotlight, though. When they got out of the car, she and Meghan got out at one side. Kate walked off reasonably quickly to join the brothers, and Meghan was rather more tentatively standing behind. And it was William who put an arm out to bring Meghan into the group and introduce her to the host. So I would say, in terms of any warmth between them or any signs of friendship or the fact that they've kissed and made up or hugged and made up, I'm afraid not. But it was certainly a good sign that they could act like adults and to respect their grandmother, and I think that was as much as it was about.
Yes, it does seem to me that, from what I can see, that Prince Harry and Meghan certainly give off an aura of being, perhaps, if not a little sheepish, definitely noting the fact that they are almost outsiders when it comes to the royal family now. Of course, because of recent actions, they may have felt rather nervous just to be around their family, I can imagine. And of course, that will come out in their body language. At the moment, we're looking at the screen. We've got the Earl and Countess of Wessex, don't we, Rafe?
Yes, and you know, the Countess of Wessex, you see there what the Queen loved about her and why she regarded her as a second daughter. Such a warmth person. You know, she was a public relations executive who wasn't expecting to live a life of royalty and monarchy and majesty, and has taken to it like a duck to water. And I think we can all be rightfully proud of her and the role that she's played in recent years, stepping up to the plate and taking on a lot of the burden of royal duties following the departure to America of Harry and Meghan.
Yes, and Judy, if you're still there, I don't wish to indulge too much in Meghan bashing, because there's an awful lot of that going on, as well as a lot of praise for her too. But how do you think it is for her in terms? What do you see in her body language when it comes to her sort of taking a step back from the limelight, just being part of something far bigger, which of course is the Queen's death and all the events that come after that? Do you think that's difficult for her?
I think it must be, and I think that she's very carefully not made it the Meghan show. You know, she's a naturally charismatic character. You could see when they were looking at the flowers that she was holding back slightly. She did start chatting, and again, you know, she's worried about the responses from the public as well, and she did get a few unpleasant responses. She took it very gracefully. She took it very well. She seems to be there primarily in the role of comforting Harry in his grief, and we could see a lot of very intimate tie signs. If you notice, they always want to reclasp hands again, and that's very important because it's an important form of communication for them. You could see Harry's fingers sort of dangling when they were looking at the flowers with a sign of anxiety. She held his hand and you could see her rubbing it gently with her thumb in a gesture of reassurance. So I think she's probably put herself in the position of being there to support Harry rather than being there and taking centre stage in the spotlight.
Now, just watching the screen, I think Prince Edward and Sophie of Wessex have now left Buckingham Palace after having greeted the huge crowds, the huge number of people waiting outside the palace. Now, Judy, one last question about King Charles, the new monarch. How do you view his body language? Is he showing the signs of being a fabulous leader for our country?
He's been very interesting. Charles is not somebody who comes out of his shell very often. You know, we've seen him as a very melancholy young prince. He obviously was then very guarded after Diana's death, introducing Camilla to the country. I think he's had a slightly distant relationship with the public. He's also been very much part of that royal stoicism. Suddenly, though, we're seeing Charles tearful, openly emotional, quite humbled with his body language. His first speech, he looked very humbled, thinking about his mother, very loving, that wonderful sentiment about Harry, where, you know, he said, "I love Harry."
Oh, I think we may have lost Judy James. That was Judy James.
You know, two incidents where he became very irritated by pens, and that's gone around the world as well. It kind of shows that he's inherited some of his father's qualities. But apart from that, it's this new experience for him that he can open up emotionally with the public and almost greet them as equals. I think we will see a much more regal man emerging as well. And when he went to Parliament, you suddenly saw some splaying. You could see him almost growing physically into the role of king. His voice deepened. He became more solid, more confident, vocally and visually. So we've seen a lot of Charles recently, I think, more emotions and more contrasts than I've seen from him since he was growing up. You know, I've been watching and analysing for years, and we've seen so many emotions. I think he is rather overwhelmed, and I think that day that he took just to think about things would probably have been extremely important for him.
Yes, I imagine so. Thank you so much for joining us, Judy. That was Judy James, body language expert. Thank you very much for your time. Now we're going to go back to our very respected and knowledgeable panel here. We've got Rafe and also we've got Charles Ray, of course. Now, King Charles, as the monarch, many people worried that with the passing of Her Majesty, the Queen Elizabeth II, that perhaps the monarchy would face many challenges, not having a queen whose reign lasted 70 years, moving on to King Charles, who has been controversial in the past in terms of speaking out on certain areas that one might deem political.
Yes, and certainly for the last 10, if not 20 years, there was a lot of trepidation and tension in the royal household as to how this very moment we're seeing played out would actually come to pass and how it would work. And I'm sure they must be feeling very reassured that the transition has gone so smoothly so far. It's still early days, but the public's reception of King Charles has been one certainly of huge encouragement to the royal household. And also, I think the King has managed to calm the nerves of traditionalists and others who thought perhaps that he might become an activist king as he was an activist prince. He's laid that to rest by saying he won't have any time to engage in his interests and charities. And also, the other great controversy was, would he say that he's defender of faith rather than of the faith? And he basically managed to deal with that effectively by saying he understands the primacy of the Anglican faith, which is of paramount importance to him, but that he wants all people in all of his realms, whatever their faith, to know that he will serve them.
He really has actually done a very good job in the last few days since the passing of the Queen. He does seem to have put some of those concerns to rest, certainly in my eyes.
Yes, he has. I mean, it's a great start. If you're going to have a start, he's had a great start in this. And I think, given I keep on referring back to the crowds. The crowds have come not just to pay their respects to the Queen, but to welcome him as their king. And I think that's a good sign to see as well, that we are seeing the monarchy is in safe hands. Monarchy has lasted for thousands of years, and it will continue to last. The monarch may change, but the monarchy itself is an institution that we embrace and we want it to stay. And that's what it will be.
And looking ahead to this evening, Rafe, there'll be another vigil, this time with the grandchildren.
That's right. So yesterday we had the Vigil of the Princes, yesterday evening, with the Princess Royal becoming the first woman to form part of that vigil.
In trouser suit.
Dressed in the uniform as Colonel of the Blues and Royals, the lifeguard of the Queen, and now of His Majesty. In about half an hour from now, there will be arriving at the palace His Majesty's Prime Ministers of the realms. So Justin Trudeau of Canada, Anthony Albanese of Australia, and Jacinda Ardern of New Zealand, to name but three. And after that, there will be a vigil of the 8 grandchildren of Her late Majesty around the coffin. We're going to have both Prince William and Prince Harry in uniform, Prince Harry at the head, Prince William at the head, Prince Harry at the foot, and then between them they will have the other grandchildren.
Now, we had the QE2 bridge, of course, and we also had the Elizabeth line for Queen Elizabeth II. Do we expect some kind of building to be erected or some kind of infrastructure for the new king? Well,
it'll be interesting to see if they change the name of the bridge that goes into Wales, which is currently the Prince of Wales Bridge. I'm assuming it will stay as the Prince of Wales Bridge because we now have a new Prince of Wales. But yes, I'm pretty sure that somewhere along the line we will have a new structure of some description that will be the King Charles tablecloth or the King Charles something or other that will be recognised that he is the new king.
Yes, and then we've got banknotes, we've got changes of all sorts that will come, postage stamps. We've got lots of changes ahead. And now, this weekend, world leaders will arrive in London ahead of Queen Elizabeth II's funeral on Monday. Some 4 billion people are expected to watch on television, paying respect to a monarch whose reign began in a post-war world where Harry Truman was American president and the Soviet Union was ruled by Joseph Stalin. Our political reporter, Catherine Forster, looks back at the relationships between the world leaders and Her Majesty.
Over 7 decades, the Queen met and charmed hundreds of world leaders, as global tributes have shown. From France's President Macron.
To you, she was your queen. To us, she was the queen. To us all, she would be with us forever.
To American President Joe Biden, who ordered all flags to be flown at half-mast over government buildings. Biden had met the Queen just last year in Windsor, following Prince Philip's death. Her reign spanned 14 US presidents and enhanced the special relationship between the two countries, so called by her first Prime Minister, Winston Churchill. The young Princess Elizabeth charmed President Harold Truman on a visit to America in October 1951. "When I was a little boy, I read about a fairy princess, and there she is," he said. Eisenhower became a firm friend. As a guest at Balmoral in 1959, he admired her homemade drop scones. She later sent him a handwritten letter with the recipe. Relations were less relaxed during the Kennedys' 1961 visit, with tension over the guest list for a dinner, and Jackie Kennedy reportedly unimpressed with the palace and Her Majesty. But the Queen was close to President Ronald Reagan, bonding over their shared love of horses. Riding at Windsor Castle in 1982 was followed by a trip to his Californian ranch the next year and a Tex-Mex lunch. Bill Clinton wrote, "But for the circumstance of her birth, she might have become a successful politician or diplomat. As it was, she had to be both, without quite seeming to be either." Certainly, when Michelle Obama committed the epic faux pas of putting her hand on the Queen's back in 2011, the Queen simply reciprocated. It's not known what she thought, though, in 2018, when Donald Trump walked in front of her while inspecting the Guard. He, however, was utterly starstruck and told GB News on the day she died.
She was a woman that was just extraordinary, Nigel, just an extraordinary woman.
Britain's relations with Russia have been less cordial, but the Queen got on well with Mikhail Gorbachev and visited Russia in 1989. But Vladimir Putin broke protocol on his state visit in 2003, arriving 15 minutes late for his meeting with Her Majesty. Nelson Mandela and the Queen had a close relationship. He was one of few people beyond the family to call her Elizabeth. And the Queen played a vital role in the evolution and success of the Commonwealth, famously dancing with the Ghanaian president in 1961. Over 70 years, she travelled over 1 million miles and to 117 countries, using her soft power to benefit Britain. As Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said,
"In a complicated world, her steady grace and resolve brought comfort and strength to us all. She was one of my favourite people in the world, and I will miss her so."
But as Her Majesty herself wrote to President Bush after September the 11th, grief is the price we pay for love. Catherine Forster, GB News.
Now, joining us live from Westminster is GB News presenter and political correspondent Tom Harwood. Tom, hi. Tom, are you there? Look up, there you are. Now, I've just been looking at your Twitter and you've just announced some breaking news. Would you like to share?
Yes, Emily, I can reveal that instead of a meeting of the President of the United States of America and the Prime Minister taking place this weekend in Downing Street, this has been delayed, but some might say upgraded to a full bilateral meeting at the UN General Assembly in New York in the middle of next week. The President of the United States, Joe Biden, is expected to meet with the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, Liz Truss, for the first time in their respective roles in a sort of side room at the headquarters of the United Nations in New York next week. Now, this is an incredibly busy schedule, of course, for the new Prime Minister. She was expected to be travelling to New York next week for UNGA, as it is known, the UN General Assembly in more normal parlance, but it's not known quite how many days of that General Assembly meeting she will be attending. Of course, what we're seeing this weekend is many world leaders coming to London. Monday, the event on which the eyes of the world will be focused, the funeral of Her late Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, where dignitaries and royal families and presidents and heads of state and prime ministers from all around the world will be in London for. And then fairly soon after that, many of those same people will be making the trip to New York for the UN General Assembly. And here back at home in the Palace of Westminster behind me, we're expecting a fiscal statement for the Chancellor at the end of that week too, which no doubt the Prime Minister will need to be back in the House of Commons to attend. It's an incredibly busy schedule, and that's just in the next 5 or 6 days. Beyond that, of course, we're expecting party conferences. First, the Labour Party conference next weekend, going into next week, and then after that, the Conservative Party conference in Birmingham, the weekend after that, going into the next week. It is the most remarkably rapid of schedules, where we'll be hearing not only new policy, not only new meetings between various leaders of various countries, but also new prospectuses for the year ahead, both from the Conservative Party, from the new Prime Minister of the country, but also from the Labour Party too. It's a very busy time in politics.
A hugely busy time for the new Prime Minister, Liz Truss. She couldn't have asked for a more challenging couple of first weeks as our new Prime Minister. What do you think will be top of the agenda with her meeting with President Biden? And is President Biden still coming to London for the state funeral?
Yes, we understand that President Biden is coming to London for the state funeral. We don't yet have a full cast list of who else from the United States of America will be coming. Of course, the palace has delegated in many ways the US delegation to the White House in order to decide who may come along. Still a big question mark over whether or not Mr. Donald Trump might be coming along, whether or not the Obamas or indeed George H.W. Bush, of course, those 4 last presidents of the United States of America. There's still some uncertainty there, although it would be very surprising to not see more presidents than just Mr. Biden attend. Clearly, what the palace and indeed Number 10 have been implying in the last week or so is that to some extent some countries where their leaders may well be less well known might want to travel in a more low-key way than they had before. There is great concern about the traffic jams we may see at airports and indeed on the streets of London. If there are motorcades for all 196 countries in the world, that is going to be one very busy city. To some extent, the leaders of perhaps less well-known leaders of smaller countries around the world have been asked to potentially think about how they may travel to the United Kingdom. Perhaps they may want to fly commercial rather than private. Now that's a big step to take, although there are many luxurious options there. Clearly a lot of planning going into Monday, lots of focal points of the world in the United Kingdom. It does seem to be this will be one of the most viewed television events of certainly the decade, perhaps the century, in terms of how many people will be tuning in to Westminster Hall to watch that funeral of our longest reigning monarch, Queen Elizabeth II. As for those bilateral conversations, it's a formal bilateral meeting in New York between the Prime Minister and the President of the United States. No doubt it will be focusing on security. Of course, the conflict in Ukraine is still near the top of the agenda, not just in terms of security, but also in terms of, frankly, the economy, in terms of the price of international energy. And of course, it was only in recent months that the AUKUS deal was signed between the United Kingdom, Australia and the United States. That submarine and security deal, no doubt that will be high on the agenda as well. Of course, the leaders of Australia and New Zealand coming to London to meet the Prime Minister tomorrow ahead of the funeral day. No doubt the free democratic states of the Western world wanting to cooperate to a greater degree to combat Russian aggression.
Been some controversy, has there not, particularly among some Conservative members of Parliament and also peers, about the guest list, in particular the presence of Chinese representatives of the Chinese Communist Party. Do you know what the latest is on who will be representing China, and also the question of Saudi Arabia?
Yes, it's a very tricky situation, of course. Now, there are some countries who frankly haven't been invited, including Russia and Belarus, for obvious reasons. But then there are other countries that the United Kingdom maintains a trading relationship with, maintains normal diplomatic relations with, that are, frankly, on the guest list. Number 10 are at pains to emphasise that it is the palace who is behind this guest list, that Number 10 is not getting involved in the politics of that the palace is the right body to decide who is allowed to attend the funeral of the late monarch. But of course, there are many different stages of this funeral. There are events that are held in the building behind me, the Palace of Westminster, controlled by the Speakers of the House of Commons and the House of Lords. Events that are held in Westminster Abbey, events that are held in Buckingham Palace as well. So clearly different parts of the funeral, different elements of that day will be controlled by different authorities, and it does seem that Parliament, particularly because of the sanctioning of several members of Parliament by the Chinese Communist Party in recent months, Parliament is taking a stronger line against the Chinese authorities visiting, making sure that, for example, the representatives of the Chinese Communist Party cannot attend elements inside Parliament. That is an announcement of the Speaker of the House of Commons, Lindsay Hoyle, whereas there is a greater degree of ambiguity towards what goes on in Westminster Abbey, more under the purview of the palace. Still, with just days to go, some final details to be worked out there.
Thank you very much, Tom. Thanks so much for your time this afternoon. At least it's sunny and fresh outside. Lots to look at, lots of people to speak to, and lots going on there on College Green in Westminster. That was, of course, GB News political correspondent Tom Harwood. Now we're going to be moving straight back to Jeff Moody, who is our reporter, who's currently in the queues to visit the Queen, lying in state. Where are you now, Jeff?
Well, we've just gone past Tower Bridge a little while ago, Tower of London, HMS Belfast, and this is Southwark Cathedral behind me. So we're making progress. We've been on the road for about 6 hours now. We started at the beginning of the queue at 9:30 this morning. We're told we've got about another 5 to 6 hours to go. They can't be precise, so we're about halfway. Great atmosphere, as you can imagine, certainly no problems that we can see. It's been very well organised. Some people have been opening up their houses for people to go in and use the loo, which is quite strange, actually. You just see somebody's house with the door open and a sign saying, please come in and use the loo. So that's a little strange, but people have been making the most of it. People on the street selling coffee. I must admit that people are looking now for some form of refreshment, and there's not an awful lot around. You'd have expected to see like burger vans or stalls along the route, and there haven't been many. Some people are getting quite hungry. It's also interesting that the queue seems to move, as you see, at a very measured, leisurely pace. And about every 20 minutes or so, it stops, and we wait for 2 or 3 minutes before starting again. And the only thing I can think of is that corresponds to the changing of the guard in Westminster Hall. That the queue inside Westminster Hall stops every 20 minutes for them to change the guard, and the ripple effect, the knock-on effect, comes right the way down here to Tower Bridge. Incredible if that is the reason. It shows absolute precision in the organisation, and I have to say it has been organised incredibly well. The police have been really friendly, posing for photographs. The stewards are great. There are marshals here as well. So far so good. It is a great atmosphere. People are getting hungry. I'm getting hungry, but so far it's been very, very enjoyable. A great atmosphere down here, quite exciting. Whether we still maintain that excitement the nearer we go, the tireder we get, and the more we start to think about why we're here and what we're about to witness. It'll be interesting to see how that mood changes in a few hours' time.
Yes, Jeff, I'm glad you mentioned food, because I was worrying that perhaps with standing on your feet all day and having to walk for hours that you might not have had enough to eat, because we have seen that ambulances have been called to the queue, because of course there will be some people who, well, either haven't eaten enough or are elderly or disabled perhaps, who can't possibly sit or stand for so long.
Well, I'm 2 out of those 3. I haven't eaten enough, and I'm quite elderly. Yes, I mean, I have to agree. I mean, I nipped into a coffee shop to buy a round of coffees for everybody in the queue around me. Good way of making friends. And, you know, I ended up, it was half an hour in this coffee queue because they didn't seem to have it organised properly. There was a massive queue. And I think there's a certain resentment of coming out of a queue to join another queue. So yes, it does feel at this stage that it would be nicer if there were stalls along the route selling hamburgers, hot dogs, that sort of thing. There were some water stations a bit further back, but that was a good couple of miles away.
Such good spirits, and do make sure you get enough to eat and drink and share with all the other people in the queue. Good luck this afternoon. Thank you very much for joining us. That was GB News reporter Jeff Moody with a big smile on his face, as usual. You're with GB News. You're with GB News on TV and DAB radio. Now it's time to check on the news headlines with Tatiana Sanchez.
Good afternoon, it is 3:28. I'm Tatiana Sanchez in the GB Newsroom. The King and Prince of Wales have made a surprise visit, greeting people in the queue to see the Queen lying in state. Hundreds of people cheered as King Charles arrived to speak to those who've been waiting in line in South London. They offered their condolences to the King and Prince William, who thanked the crowd for standing in the cold throughout the night to pay their respects to the late monarch. The Prince of Wales could be heard asking them how long they'd waited for. The government website currently suggests the wait time is up to 16.5 hours. Well, earlier, the King and Prince of Wales visited the Met Police Special Operations Room. King Charles was greeted by the new Commissioner, Sir Mark Rowley, Home Secretary Suella Braverman and London Mayor Sadiq Khan. Both he and Prince William thanked emergency service staff for their work during the period of mourning. The security operation for State Funeral on Monday is set to be the biggest in the Met Police Force's history, surpassing the London Olympics. Later today, Queen Elizabeth's grandchildren will stand guard around her coffin in Westminster Hall. Last night, the late monarch's children, King Charles, the Princess Royal, Duke of York and the Earl of Wessex held their own 15-minute vigil, honouring their mother. Prince Harry has been given special dispensation by his father to wear his military uniform despite no longer being a working royal. Prince Andrew has also been given the same permission. World leaders have started arriving ahead of the state's funeral, with around 500 dignitaries expected to attend. A number have visited Westminster Hall to pay their respects, including the Canadian Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau. New Zealand's Jacinda Ardern also attended the Queen's lying in state, as well as the Australian Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese. Rehearsals for the funeral were held in Windsor in the early hours of the morning, with the procession moving down the long walk towards the castle gates. Royal Pageant Master Bruno Peake says a lot of planning has gone into the event.
Rehearsal side is the element that will 99.9% guarantee that you will have a successful event. And again, these guys and these ladies who are actually taking part, in the military, this will be such a proud moment for them. So they're going to be making sure that they don't put a step wrong.
In other news, Ukraine says the mass grave discovered in the eastern city of Izium is proof of Russia's war crimes. More than 450 bodies, most of them civilians, were found, some with their hands tied behind their backs. The city was recently liberated after 6 months of Russian occupation. The Kremlin denies it's targeting civilians or committing war crimes. The White House says it will continue to support Ukraine and hold Moscow accountable. This is what spokesman John Kirby had to say.
It's horrifying. It's repugnant. And sadly, it's in keeping with the kind of depravity and the brutality with which Russian forces have been prosecuting this war against Ukraine and the Ukrainian people. And we're going to continue to actively support efforts to document war crimes and atrocities that Russian forces commit in Ukraine and to assist national and international efforts to identify and hold Russians accountable.
Police investigators are looking at whether race was a factor in the fatal shooting of Chris Carber by an armed officer in South London. The 24-year-old's family says they're angry that the investigation by the police regulator could take as long as 9 months. Mr. Carber, who was unarmed, was killed following a police pursuit of his car 2 weeks ago. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens.
Now, it's been reported that Harry and Meghan are angry that their children Archie and Lilibet will not be granted his or her Royal Highness titles when their children are appointed Prince and Princess by King Charles III. The new king has agreed to issue a letters patent to grant the children Prince and Princess titles, but will not grant them HRH status as their parents stopped using HRH after stepping down as senior working royals back in 2020. Further questions have been raised on whether the Queen's death has also led to an increase in racial abuse and tensions. This is something that Rakib Hassan, who will now be joining us, has looked into a bit. Social policy analyst Dr. Rakib Hassan, thank you very much for joining me on the show this afternoon. Now, before we get into the HRH titles, this is something that I have found concerning. There seems to be a minority-held view that the monarchy as an institution and also the individuals in the royal family alienate those of different races and different religious faiths in this country.
Well, Emily, I think that's not the case at all. I think you'll find that that traditional triad of faith, family and flag is well and truly alive in many ethnic minority communities across the country. For example, my hometown of Luton, during the Platinum Jubilee celebrations, there was Union flag bunting all over the town. And I think that it's really important to understand the traditional values which are held in many ethnic minority communities. And that was precisely why Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II was appreciated the way she was across a range of ethnic and racial groups. So I do feel people who are suggesting that there's been a great deal of racial abuse, that the existence of the royal family is alienating it alienates ethnic minority communities. I simply don't think that's the case at all, Emily. I think in an age where secular liberal individualism has really gained a foothold, I think that Her Majesty's emphasis on the family values, the comfort of community, I think that really resonated with many, social traditionalists in ethnic minority communities.
Yes, I think for the vast majority of people in this country, whatever faith, whatever creed, whatever race, whatever ethnicity, the monarchy is something that they can be proud of as being part of being British, fundamental to their identity as being British. However, there is a minority-held view, is there not? I saw a columnist, and I think it's something that you also shared on your social media account as well, a columnist who claims that the Queen's death has unleashed a torrent of racist abuse. Is there evidence to back up that claim? It sounds wildly exaggerated.
Well, for me, Emily, it sounds like the creation of a parallel reality, if truth be told. Her Majesty was a national symbol of unity and constancy. And I do feel that when you're looking at those kind of articles, it's not driven by evidence in any way, shape or form. I think when you're looking at those long queues to see the Queen's lying in state, as you say, it covers a range of racial, ethnic and religious groups. But Her Majesty's emphasis on faith, people will say because she was a defender of the faith, at the head of the Church of England, that may alienate or marginalise non-Christian minorities, but that's not the case at all. I think her devotion to faith, her commitment to interfaith cohesion in modern-day Britain, she won over many people in non-Christian minorities. And you saw during her Golden Jubilee tour, she visited a variety of places of worship. And that was something which meant that she gained even more respect within those communities that we're referring to.
And Rakib, we also saw King Charles, the new monarch. He said it was his personal duty to protect the diversity of our country. And that was in a speech to more than 30 faith leaders from various religions, and that was at a reception in Buckingham Palace. The King is very aware of the fact that we no longer live in a homogenous society, that we have a multiracial, multi-faith country, and he wants to make sure that we are cohesive.
Absolutely. I think that the statement made by King Charles III, it does reflect that we are an advanced multi-faith democracy, and that the royal family has played a great role in fostering that over decades. Her Majesty did a great deal of work in terms of encouraging interfaith dialogue, really emphasising those values of civic duty, public service, social responsibility that can bring together, tie together a variety of faith groups. And I think that King Charles III, he understands that there is somewhat of a need for a figurehead. That, you know, when we're talking about that we live in an era of materialistic individualism, that sort of devil take the hindmost materialistic individualism, that he's there really talking about those, you know, the value, the security and stability that can come with family, the neighborliness of community, and that the kind of optimism and resilience that can come from having a strong sense of faith, that those are things that can tie together a variety of groups in our multi-faith democracy. So I think it's really, I think it's really pleasing to see that from King Charles III.
Yeah, definitely. And it does seem to me that, unfortunately, we have some people in this country who like to focus on what makes us different, whether that be based on our race or gender identity or whatnot, our faith. And the evidence doesn't show that most people feel these divisions. If you look at the Jubilee celebrations, for example, there were people of all ethnicities and backgrounds waiting in the queue that's up on the screen here to see the Queen lying in state, to see the Queen's coffin lying in state. There are people from all different backgrounds, people from different nationalities even, all there to pay their respects. I do feel like if we focus on divisions so much, we may well perpetuate them.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more, Emily. And I think that we really have to make the point that the values that Her Majesty embodied, they were shared by a variety of groups living in modern day Britain. And I'd really make the point, to be honest, that the royal family does a great deal of good, not only domestically, but internationally as well. Indeed, Her Majesty spearheaded that smooth transition from empire to Commonwealth. And that was especially important considering that many of our ethnic minority communities do originate from established members of the Commonwealth. I do feel that there are some people I would consider to be radical anti-monarchists, sort of cultural liberals, who almost, at times, to be honest, Emily, they use ethnic minorities in their kind of pseudo-revolutionary games, calling for the royal family ultimately to be dismantled, and saying that this is something that would command a great deal of support in ethnic and racial minorities. But to be honest, the evidence that currently exists tells me that that's not the case at all.
Thank you very much, Rakib. Thanks for joining me on this sunny afternoon. Thank you very much for your time. Now,
thank you, Emily.
Now, Rafe, that was a very interesting discussion, was it not? It's something that we touched on earlier in the previous hour, was the way that actually the monarch can unite people from all different backgrounds.
Yes, the problem with all the nonsense we've been hearing in recent days, weeks, months, if not years, about the monarchy and race is really fueled in large part by ignorance. You know, the monarchy has been actually very progressive on these issues, far ahead of the commonly held views of the time. Go back as far back as King George III. He wrote an essay condemning slavery decades before the abolition of slavery. Queen Victoria was learning Hindustani and Urdu from one of her beloved Muslim servants, Muhammad Karim Abdul. She had Sikh attendants wearing turbans when a lot of people thought he should be uncovered in front of the sovereign. King Edward VII was strongly opposed to anti-Semitism and welcomed Catholics in. And then, of course, our own Queen danced dancing with the president of Ghana in 1961, Nelson Mandela being one of the only people outside of her family to call her Elizabeth, and then, of course, with our own Prince of Wales and what he's done for interfaith dialogue, his close ties to the Orthodox faith, his close ties to the Islamic faith. I mean, the monarchy has really been at the cutting edge of inclusivity.
Sounds like a rather tolerant and outward-looking monarchy, does it not, Charles, very quickly?
It is a very outward-looking monarchy. They've been doing all this quietly for years and years and years, and it will continue.
Yes, I think so. And papers like the New York Times should perhaps read their history books before they make outlandish statements. If anyone has seen what they've been writing in recent days, maybe don't bother looking. Anyway, the new Chancellor, Kwasi Kwarteng, will deliver his long-awaited emergency mini-budget next Friday. In political news, it is expected to set out the government's plans to cut taxes and offer additional help to households and businesses with their energy bills. The Chancellor is also said to be planning to scrap the cap on bankers' bonuses to encourage more investment and economic growth. With me now to discuss this is the former chief economist at Standard Chartered, Dr. Gerard Lyons. Gerard, thank you very much for joining me this afternoon to discuss what comes next week in terms of politics and economic announcements. What do you expect to be the first few things that Kwasi announces?
Well, good afternoon. It's great to be on the show. I should say I'm the current chief economic strategist at Net Wealth as well.
Oh, thank you for correcting me.
In terms of this week, well, it's a very important week for the economy because on Wednesday we're likely to have further details about the energy price cap, which was the welcome news announced just before the royal death. Then on Thursday, the Bank of England will have its Monetary Policy Committee meeting, which is likely to raise interest rates. And then on Friday, we have the mini-budget. Now, in terms of the mini-budget, I think there are a number of different components of it. The Chancellor, I think, will outline measures to address the immediate challenges confronting the economy. Then I think he will outline further measures and also his principles underlying his pro-growth strategy, because the new government is very determined to turn the economy around and to achieve much more sustainable future growth. And then, of course, on top of all that, as is always the case, whether it's a budget or a mini-budget, the focus of attention will be on the fiscal measures themselves, what he does in terms of tax in particular. So there's a whole raft of issues in terms of Friday. So it's a particularly important event, not just for the general public, for businesses, but also for financial markets in terms of laying down a clear indication of where the government plans to go in terms of economic policy.
Yes, this is an opportunity for the new government to show just how radical, I guess, it's going to be in terms of its free market narrative. You've got probably the most free market cabinet that we've ever seen, possibly, or at least since Margaret Thatcher. We've seen reports leaked that Kwasi is going to scrap the cap on bankers' bonuses. Some people might say that's a bit of a controversial move at a time of a cost of living crisis. But is this simply one indication of a change in narrative, a change in the way our government wishes to manage the economy, get rid of regulation that might be holding back prosperity in the city?
Well, there's a whole host of issues there, but I think you're right in terms of the government wants to have smart regulation, low taxes, but there's a whole host of issues beside that. In terms of bankers' bonuses themselves, a clear statement of intent is to try and make the city more competitive internationally in order to ensure that high-paid jobs are in London as opposed to going to New York or being created in New York. So the city, the financial sector, is one of the most important areas of the economy. It's one of the biggest sources of tax revenue for the exchequer. So in terms of bankers' bonuses, the important measure there and the steps being taken there are to cement the competitiveness of the city. But in addition to that, during her campaign, Liz Truss, before she became Prime Minister, talked about changing Solvency II. And now this might sound quite technical, but a key underlying aspect of that is to change the regulations so insurance companies and others will be able to invest more in UK infrastructure. So it's not just about making the city more competitive in its own right. There will also be measures to try and make the city and financial services better serve the UK economy. And this is an important step to actually helping strengthen and grow the UK economy faster. But on top of that, there will be other measures, particularly on Friday. In his mini statement, the Chancellor is likely to endorse the tax changes that were talked about in the last few weeks, namely reversing the tax increases that were planned. And the key thing about this is that a couple of months ago, the financial markets and the Bank of England itself were expecting the UK economy to go into a deep recession. The Bank of England projected that the economy would fall into recession by the end of this year and stay in it all through next year. Now, by capping energy prices and by reversing those planned tax increases, the aim is to prevent that deep recession that 1 or 2 months ago seemed inevitable. It's unlikely to be able to prevent a slowdown, but the idea is to try and confront immediate problems head on to protect the general public and businesses themselves.
Yes, and she's only got 2 years. This administration only has 2 years to prove that deregulation and cutting taxes works. And that's a very short time to perhaps see the benefits of those changes towards smarter regulation or those small tax cuts that she has planned.
Well, I think it's important to stress that the 2 areas you've talked about are only 2 components of the overall likely economic strategy. In terms of fiscal policy, it's about fiscal discipline, but at the same time, it's ensuring that fiscal policy can be used in the short term to stabilise the economy. And we shouldn't be worried about borrowing if necessary. On the supply side, it's about more than tax changes and it's about more than deregulation. It's about boosting investment, it's about encouraging innovation, it's about boosting infrastructure, and I mentioned Solvency II, and it's also about getting the incentives right through tax and through deregulation. No one is saying that tax cuts themselves are the only thing to turn the economy round. They're just an important part in terms of rewarding those people in work and actually in terms of helping businesses. But on top of that, it's also important to make sure that we get inflation under control, and that comes under the remit of the Bank of England. So there's a whole raft of areas. The world economy is slowing. The world economy is in a very difficult situation. So the challenges confronting the UK are not unique. But we basically have seen in the last week and a half, in terms of the energy price cap, and we're likely to see this week in terms of the mini budget, a determination to actually be practical as well as principled in terms of trying to confront immediate challenges. So I would say that at the end of this week, we should be positive, hopefully, about what lies ahead, despite the real near-term challenges.
There's a boosterist message from you, Dr. Gerard. I must say I am worried about how relaxed politicians of all stripes are about our debt and about our deficit. It seems that we've completely forgotten what the big argument was in the Cameron years under George Osborne as well in the Treasury, that, you know, we couldn't spend too much more than we take in. At the moment, it seems that billions are pennies.
Okay, well, the UK economy faces a twin challenge of higher inflation and economic slowdown. Monetary policy needs to address the inflation challenge, but it needs to be mindful of how fragile the economy and financial markets are. But fiscal policy needs to stabilise the economy now. So the important thing is that even though yields and interest rates have risen over the last year, the government can still borrow relatively cheaply. So the tax changes now in terms of the borrowing is necessary, is non-inflationary because of the nature of our inflation shock, and it's affordable. But there is no doubt, as the Chancellor Kwasi Kwarteng outlined last week, fiscal discipline really underpins this government. The point is that you can reduce debt to GDP steadily over time. So you mustn't constrain yourself. You need to confront the immediate challenges. Your concerns about borrowing, I think, might be slightly misplaced. But the important thing is for the Chancellor to assuage or address those concerns, not only reflected from you, but across the financial markets. So there is scope to address challenges at the moment through fiscal policy. Make no doubt that by raising the trend rate of growth through all the measures we talked about a few moments ago, the aim is to reduce the ratio of debt to GDP steadily and continuously for some time. So it's a difficult balancing act, but with clear policies and clear principles, the hope is that the general public, businesses and markets will understand that. But there's no doubt that financial markets, as is always the case, always need to be convinced when there's a new government, particularly if interest rates are rising and if debt is high. It's about taking on those challenges and addressing those issues head on.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for joining me this afternoon. That was Dr. Gerard Lyons, Chief Economist at Standard Chartered, and I've also forgotten he reminded me of something else in his CV, but it's gone now. But thank you very much for your time. Now, when Queen Elizabeth II's state funeral takes place on Monday, more than 500 dignitaries from across the globe will be in attendance. This will include foreign monarchs, presidents and UK prime ministers past and present, which is testament to her popularity both at home and abroad. But why was Her Majesty so popular overseas? Arman Singh Bogal, chairman of the Global Britain Centre, joins me now to discuss this. Now, Arman, what can you tell me about the Queen's relationship with those overseas?
Well, thank you for having me on the show, Emily. Look, I think it's very clear around the world, 70 glorious years of selfless service, 14 US presidents, and her first prime minister was born in 1874, and her last prime minister was born 101 years later. And I think that alone tells us that Her Majesty has been Global Britain's greatest ambassador. And it is testament, what you just said, that more than 500 dignitaries are going to be there for the funeral on Monday. And we've seen here, I mean, I've been here in India for the last few weeks, and we saw here the Indian tricolour flying half-mast across the country here, with Prime Minister Modi declaring a day of national state mourning. And I think that alone that tells us the whole story of just how much respect Her Majesty commanded across the Commonwealth. And that's the other thing. As the Indian Foreign Minister put it, I think he put it very well. He said that Her Majesty guided our nation from empire to Commonwealth to modern contemporary times as a truly modern, multi-ethnic, multi-faith, modern democracy that we all today are proud to call home.
And now as King Charles, as we await his coronation, which may well be in a number of months, how do you think his relationship will differ from the Queen's, or will he continue on in her legacy?
Well, I think what Her Majesty has provided for the nation and for our international relations is continuity, is stability, is a great understanding of nations around the world, our friends and allies around the world. I think Her Majesty's knowledge and understanding of detail of the different cultures that make up our Commonwealth, the Commonwealth, is unrivaled. And I think King Charles III will follow in that legacy, very much so. I think he's visited India nearly a dozen times. He had a great understanding of not just India, but many nations around the world, which he has, again, he has been, I think after Her Majesty, our second greatest diplomat, promoting global Britain around the world. And again, there is that huge name recognition that comes with King Charles III. And again, that is testament to the great work that he has done over the years to, you could say, supplement in many ways the great work that the Queen herself did. So I think the respect is going to continue. I think the personal connect that King Charles III has with many world leaders already, having been at the forefront of aspects of environment, aspects of multi-faith engagement, promoting global Britain. I mean, let's not forget, the Queen is global Britain, and global Britain is the Queen.
There we go. That's a very sorry, Arman. I must interrupt you. Thank you so much for taking the time to zoom in all the way from India this afternoon. Thank you very much. That was Arman Singh Bogal, chairman of the Global Britain Centre. Thank you again for your time. Now, finally, London's transport chief has warned that the capital faces the biggest challenge in its history, with millions expected to descend on the city in the coming days. With me now is travel journalist and broadcaster Simon Calder. Simon, what can we expect for travel at the weekend?
Very good question. It's already extremely busy. I'm here at London Waterloo, which is the busiest railway station in the UK. And all afternoon, trains have been bringing people in from Surrey, from Berkshire, from Hampshire, from Wiltshire, from Dorset. Many of them simply here, I've been talking to one or two, just because they want to get the atmosphere in the capital. They want to see the floral tributes. They want to see the famous queue, of course, which is stretching away along the South Bank. And as you say, it's extraordinarily busy. And the warning is from the Transport for London Commissioner, Andy Byford, really be prepared for crowds, for some stations being partly open, some being closed. I've been round a number of mainline rail stations, and while coming into London by train is most certainly the way to do it, there's all sorts of systems in place, and simply moving around the centre of the capital. Well, if you're a Londoner, or indeed if you're a regular visitor to London, then whatever your journey is, if it involves central London, assume it's going to take 2 or 3 times longer than normal, simply because there's many roads closed off, many buses actually at a standstill. The tube is running well, but it is filling up. And I think this is a story we will see right through till Monday. And now, actually, the train companies are getting concerned about what's going to happen immediately after Her Majesty's funeral on Monday. The concern is that everybody who's been in London paying their respects will immediately want to leave by their nearest mainline terminal. So it could be busy. If you possibly can, stretch your journey. Great Western Railway, East Midlands Railway, laying on trains all through Monday night to get people to Leicester, to Derby, to Bath, to Bristol.
And so the unions, have they had the sense not to schedule any strikes over this period?
Well, there was due to be a national rail strike today. That's what I thought I'd be talking to you about. In fact, it's been deferred, and we are expecting a large shutdown 2 weeks today, Saturday the 1st of October, day before the London Marathon, and also the day before the Conservative Party conference. The unions haven't announced those, but the train operators have.
Yes, that's quite clever timing, I would say, from the unions who are battling with the Conservative government to try and make getting to the party conference as difficult as possible. Just very quickly, how are the hotels? The prices must be obscene.
Almost everything has sold out. There is still one 5-star hotel quite close to Buckingham Palace. Got a room tomorrow night, standard double, £1,550. If you want a budget hotel, I'm afraid they all seem to have sold out days ago. Good luck, everybody, and I hope everyone gets where they need to be. There are trains overnight at St Pancras and at King's Cross station, so-called welfare trains, where people can just go and sit and be comfortable, and that's not going to cost you anything.
Thank you very much, Simon. Thanks very much for broadcasting live from Waterloo Station. You've been watching Real Britain with me, Emily Carver. Thank you so much for your company this afternoon. Bev Turner is here next, but for now, I'll leave you with the weather.
Looking ahead to this evening's weather, and the UK is looking dry with clear spells for many, but some showers feeding in from the north. Let's take a look at the details. Starting off in the southwest of England, and here it will be a fine end to the day with late sunshine leading into largely clear skies for most this evening. Similar in the southeast, temperatures will dip under the clear skies even in London, where it will fall to a chilly 6 Celsius tonight. Whilst the odd shower across North Wales can't be ruled out, across much of the country it will also be a fine end to the day. Around the Midlands, there will be barely a cloud in the sky this evening. This does mean it will again turn a little chilly overnight, and then more cloud is likely through the coming days. Some cloud will be feeding in from the north, affecting northeast England this evening. Whilst it will be dry for most, some coastal